Alex, so welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing you another batch standalone review. I started doing these because I always like to reference back to reviews where possible if I'm talking about a book. And with most of my series, since I read them and then do a dedicated series review, that's never been an issue. With standalones, however, what ended up happening was that I had nowhere to reference someone back to on my thoughts on the book. And therefore, I would kind of have to give a mini review and synopsis every single time I mentioned a book that was a standalone. And that got very frustrating. So I have decided that I am going to review 5 standalones in different videos. At the moment, I am doing them by theme. It is simply because I have such a back catalogue of them that I have enough to review them by theme. Eventually, the hope is that I will catch up with myself and then I will be able to simply do it in whichever are the next 5 that I read. At the moment, since we are by theme, this one is my second Romantasy one. I will leave the first Romantasy one linked in case you are interested. I will also leave timestamps for all the different books that I am reviewing down below. The first one I'm going to talk about today is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. In this story, we are following a young man named Zach who at his university campus happens to find a book that no one else has ever heard of. And as he's flicking through, it happens to, amongst the pages, detail events of his life. So then he continues to read through the book, and it's how the fantastical and fable-like elements of the book converge with his real life. This has a interesting romance. It has a dark academia vibe to it, while at the same time feeling like a whimsical fairy tale. The hybrid is absolutely beautiful. I love Erin Morgenstern's writing style. Now, Erin Morgenstern is a very interesting one because the 2 books that I have read of hers, which are the only ones as far as I'm aware that are currently out, are The Night Circus and The Starless Sea. Neither of them have very similar vibes in terms of the actual content within the book. This one is a contemporary story hybrid with a fairy tale. The Night Circus is a Victorian whimsical romance that is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. So not a huge amount of overlap, and therefore stylistically they are somewhat different. And yet there is something about Erin Morgenstern's writing that you could pick out a sentence from either book and you would know it's Erin Morgenstern. And I absolutely adore when literature becomes art like this, and that is something that I really appreciate about Erin Morgenstern stories. This one in particular, I really did love the combination that we had of the dark academia essence, the almost haunting mystery of wondering what is this book, and at the same time, once we are within the story, we have these interludes and these sections that are there to literally suck you into the story in an absolutely beautiful way. And I love the way that both of them were depicted. I don't think that this story is going to be for everyone. I think if you want like a really cohesive and structured story, this might not be for you. I think that this one has so much whimsy in it that I think anyone who is hyper rational would really struggle with. Likewise, I also think that anyone who wants there to be a very logical outcome to everything instead of it all feeling a little bit metaphorical would also struggle with it. But I'm not trying to put you off, because even if you are someone who normally prefers harder fantasy, I would still say that this is absolutely gorgeous, and the level of description is so immersive that it does have a very awe-inspiring experience to it, even if you are normally someone who reads whimsical fantasy. A book that I would highly recommend. I gave this 5 stars. I love everything that Erin Morgenstern's written. And if you've read The Night Circus but have been hesitant about The Starless Sea simply because of it having a very different style synopsis, I would still recommend checking it out. The second one that I'm going to talk about is I have Upon a Frosted Star by M.A. Kuznia. Upon a Frosted Star is a retelling of Swan Lake. This one is told in a 1920s setting, and in it we are in this city where an enigmatic man goes around and once a year has this very lustrous ball and leaves invitations all over the city for people to be able to join. One day a young man manages to get one of these invitations and attend the ball and falls in love with a girl. Now obviously we have this Swan Lake element to it, which I won't go into much further, but it's an absolutely beautiful retelling. I really appreciated the way that we have this contrast between the otherworldly feel, this almost portal fantasy feel of the the balls and the beauty of it versus the more impoverished and dank and less appealing 1920s vibe that we have. This story is told over multiple years and multiple perspectives, which I also really appreciated. The story is told in such a fascinating way, and it was a really interesting choice on how the author decided to do it. Overall, this book would have been a 5-star, except that I really didn't become fully invested in the romance, which with a romantasy would be helpful. So while the setting was extraordinary and the retelling elements and the way the story was told, the writing style was gorgeous, I just for some reason could not really buy into the romance between the two characters. And therefore, as much as I loved it, I didn't find that the romance was unnecessary in a way, even though it was a very central point, because I just wasn't invested in it. So everything else about the story I loved, but the romance didn't pull through for me. It does seem like I'm in a minority there anyway, though, so I wouldn't really heed my word on it. I couldn't even pinpoint what the disconnect was. I just didn't feel completely enamored with the actual pairing. But the story is wonderful. The next one that I'm going to talk about is The Undermining of Twyla and Frank by Megan Bannon. This is one that is technically part of a series, is the Tom Rea series. I talk about the first book in the previous Romantasy video, so again that is linked, but this one is the somewhat sequel. However, they are individual romance stories, so what I will do is I will put each of them in kind of like a standalone video and then potentially do a full series one when they are all out. This one, however, we have a When Harry Met Sally retelling, and we have Twyla, who is a widowed woman who is learning to have some agency for the first time. She's always been allocated a role. She was daughter, then she was wife, and then she was mother, and these are all shackles that she is shaking off of herself. Once she becomes widowed, her best friend Frank encourages her to join him in the Marshals, who are the somewhat police force in this fictional world. They are very, very close. He is divorced, and therefore they spend most of their time together. And they are partners on this police force. Their jobs start to dwindle in interest. So after the events of book 1, something changes, which means that this huge force of marshals no longer has quite as much to do. However, Twyla and Frank happen to stumble upon what is eventually discovered to be a dragon egg. So then they need to call in a specialist in dragons. But dragons in this world are like dinosaurs. Like, we knew they used to exist, but we haven't seen one in centuries. So it'd be like bringing in a paleontologist to deal with a baby dinosaur. Like, they know the theory of it, but they don't really know what they're doing. It's very fascinating. And then he starts to flirt with Twyla, and it's how she begins to kind of see herself as someone who is still appealing, who is still attractive, and it's how Frank very much wishes that she felt that way about him instead. The romance between these two is stunning. I absolutely love it. I really resonated with Twyla because while I'm not actually, I was a very young mum, so I don't consider myself particularly old. I have unlike Twyla, I have an incredibly supportive spouse who has never once made me feel like I am practically a single parent. He has done 50% of everything at minimum. That's not where I resonate with Twyla. I resonate with Twyla in the sense that once you become a mum, the psychology around feeling sexy, around your body being something that is anything other than oven, takes a while. And when she is treated the way she is, it's natural it would take her longer. So I really did resonate with some of her views that she had about herself, less than the interpersonal relationships that she has. So I really did appreciate reading that and feeling a bit seen on here. Thankfully, I've never had a spouse that has made me feel like crap, but I did still understand her own inner monologue. I also loved Frank as a love interest. He reminds me of my husband in the sense that he has no grand gestures, he has no speeches, no proclamations to say that you are the most beautiful person in the world. He is a constant. He is someone who sees that you're down and picks you up. Someone who, when you're not feeling well, will take care of you. Someone who, if you need something, you don't need to ask, they just do. That's their act of love. Their act of love isn't going to buy you flowers. It's, I am going to help you. I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to support you. I love that. It's just such a beautiful way of telling someone that you care about them and you love them, and I really loved seeing that from Frank. So if you're looking for a slightly different take on romance, I think I would highly recommend checking this one out. 5 stars, and I think I'm in the minority, but I actually preferred this more than Heart and Mercy. The next one that I have is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This one is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and it is set in a fictionalized version of Russia. In this story, we have 3 perspectives. The first one being Miriam, who is the daughter of the village money lender. However, her father is absolutely terrible at his job and basically never actually demands repayment, which ends up in them becoming almost destitute. And with her mother being unwell and in need of medicine, she decides to take it upon herself to go back and collect all of her father's debts. She kind of garners a reputation as being someone who can turn silver into gold, and that garners the attention of the Fae. We also have Irina, whose father has married her off to the Tsar, who has a horrible reputation for being a not nice person. However, it would garner her father so much political influence that they kind of can't resist. So she is now set to wed this awful, awful man. And then finally, we are also following Wanda, who is a young woman whose father owed a debt to Miriam's father, and when Miriam comes to collect and her father can't pay, Miriam decides instead that she will take Wanda's labor. This is actually so that she can get Wanda away from her abusive father, and Wanda is then actually still paid a salary. It's just a lower sum that helps pay off her father's debt, but it allows Wanda some independence that she has never had before. The female camaraderie in here is probably the best element of it. I love all of the interactions between these women. The setting is also absolutely stunning, and I love Naomi Novik's writing and the way that she brings all of that to life. I also found that the discussions in here around female power, about women's autonomy, about the impact men have on women, we're dissecting all of these bad fathers. You have Miriam's father, who is a loving and caring father, but he is not providing in a time where only men could really provide. To the point where Miriam is now having to endanger herself simply because of her father's gentility. But it's not showing his gentility as weakness so much as his inability to set that aside to protect his family. So there were some very interesting conversations in there. And then, yes, we have 2 rather abusive fathers in here as well. So we have lots of conversations around women's dependency on men, and I really appreciated that. There was a big issue in this book, though, for me personally, which was that I didn't always know whose perspective I was in for several pages. It could take up to 3 or 4 pages before I would know whose perspective I was following. Sometimes it would be straight away. So for example, here it says, Wanda, Miriam said to me, easy peasy. But then there were other times where it would be just first person for ages and I wouldn't know who we're talking about. Sometimes you can discern from setting, but even then, a lot of the time Miriam and Wanda are in the same setting because they work together. So there was a lot going on in there that made it difficult for me to discern exactly whose POV that I'm in, which then in turn made me not be able to be fully immersed because my brain is trying really hard to figure out who on earth we're talking about. So there is that. I did really enjoy this book though, and I would still highly recommend it. I just think that potentially it would have benefited from at the start of every chapter just having like a whose perspective we're in. That would have been nice because then my brain could have just gone, yep, okay, let's roll with it. I also think that says a little bit about the writing style where they're all in first person but I couldn't discern them. It meant that I didn't feel like they each had a hugely distinctive voice within their own inner monologue, which I would have preferred. That being said, gorgeous story, really well written. For someone who very much has the book play out like a movie inside my brain, I did struggle sometimes with just having to basically pause the movie to be able to figure out who I'm following, which was a shame. But I still loved it. And I would love to read more in this style of book from Naomi Novik. And the last one that I have to talk about today is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This one is a story in which we are following Addie LaRue, who in 1714 is about to endure an arranged marriage with someone that she despises. So she makes a deal with the devil, a bargain to live forever but be remembered by none. Therefore, she manages to escape the clutches of her family, but every time that she is out of the sight of someone, they completely forget who she is. We have her who one day a man remembers who she is, and then romance ensues from there. There were lots of things in here that I really, really liked, and there were lots of things that I wish had been done differently. I wish we'd had more time with Addie throughout the years before the contemporary timeline where we meet this guy. I would have really liked to seen how she'd navigated all of these different environments that have occurred over the last 300 years. I wish we had seen her go through the different eras and how she coped and how she survived and being, you know, forgotten for so long. The psychology side of being forgotten and the way that she still finds ways to make her mark on the world were really beautiful, and I really appreciated that. I also personally wish there hadn't been a romance. I know that sounds weird to be talking about a romantasy like that, but I really wish it had been a friendship instead of a romance, because it kind of undermines the romance in the sense that here's the first person to remember her. So there's a tiny bit of me that's like, how much is her loving him because she's in love with him, and how much is her loving him because he's literally the only viable option because no one else remembers her. There were some things in here that, while they were kind of addressed, I just wish that there was no romance in here, or that she'd been remembered by someone else first or something. So there were some things that it just didn't suit my personal tastes. I appreciate also that for fans of V Shrub that this is quite a step away from her usual writing style as well. I thought the writing style was really nice, but I just didn't really connect with some of the other elements that then still made me not love the book as much as I wished I had. So while I think it's a really good book, and if you're a romantasy fan and you're not fussed about history and you're just kind of happy with the contemporary timeline and you're here specifically for this romance, then that is fine, and I think this would be a really, really good book for you. There were just elements that I wish had been more impactful for me personally. And there you have it. There are 5 romantasy standalones that I have read, and those are my thoughts on them. So let me know what your thoughts on any of these books are. Let me know, if based on my liking of these books, if you have any other recommendations for me. And that is all from me for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye!